She wasn't a killer. She wasn't a spy. She wasn't trained for combat, never fired a gun in her life, never threw a punch that landed clean. She was a secretary. But on the night assassins tore through the most fortified skyscraper in Seoul, when bulletproof glass shattered like sugar, and the most feared crime boss in South Korea lay bleeding on the floor with 3 of his best soldiers already dead, she was the only one left standing between him and a body bag. Nobody saw her coming. Nobody ever did. If you want to find out how a woman everyone overlooked brought an entire criminal empire to its knees, stay until the very end. Hit that like button right now and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see exactly how far this story travels. The rain came down hard that Thursday night, the kind of rain that turned Seoul's streets into black mirrors and made the city feel like it was slowly drowning in its own reflection. 42 floors above the chaos of Gangnam-gu, inside the glass and steel tower that housed the legitimate front offices of KH Holdings, Nyla Brooks was doing what she always did at 11:17 on a Thursday night, working. Her desk sat in the outer office directly adjacent to Kang Jae-hyun's private suite, a position that sounded prestigious and felt like a cage. The space was immaculate, everything in its place, color-coded folders stacked at precise angles, 3 monitors running simultaneous feeds of financial data, a half-eaten container of convenience store kimbap going cold beside her keyboard because she'd forgotten, again, to actually stop and eat it while it was warm. The overhead lights had dimmed to their after-hours setting, casting the office in a pale bluish glow that made everyone look slightly dead. Nyla had stopped noticing it months ago. She was 30 years old, she had worked for Kang Jae-hyun for 4 years, 2 months, and she didn't actually count the days, that would be pathetic. Some number of days she refused to calculate. She was 5'4", dark-skinned, full-figured in a way that Seoul's fashion industry had precisely 0 interest in, and possessed of a mind so sharp that multiple people had made the mistake of underestimating it exactly once before never doing so again. Her natural hair was pulled back tonight in a low bun that had been professional at 9 a.m. and was now just survival. She wore reading glasses she kept meaning to upgrade, and a blazer she'd been meaning to dry clean for 2 weeks. She looked, in other words, exactly like what everyone believed she was. Invisible. The outer office was empty except for her. Park Sung-jin, the junior assistant who normally shared the space, had left at 6, claiming a family emergency that Nyla suspected was actually a date. She hadn't said anything. She never did. She'd simply absorbed his pending items into her own queue with the quiet efficiency that had become her primary defining characteristic inside KH Holdings, or, as the people who actually knew what the organization was called it, when no one outside was listening, the Black Phoenix Syndicate. Nyla knew. She had known for approximately 11 months and 14 days. She counted that one because it was the kind of knowledge that changed the geography of your life permanently. She had found out the way she found out most things, by being thorough, paying attention, and being so thoroughly beneath notice that people spoke freely in her presence. A shipment manifest that didn't match any legitimate import record. A phone call conducted in hushed Korean that shifted registers mid-sentence in a way that had nothing to do with business consulting. A set of encrypted files on a server she'd been tasked to reorganize that contained names, figures, and territorial maps that no consulting firm in the world had legitimate use for. She had taken that knowledge and she had buried it so deep inside herself that it barely left a scar on her daily expression. Because what was the alternative? Walk out? Go to the police, explain that she'd spent 4 years organizing the calendar and managing the travel arrangements of one of the most powerful organized crime bosses in South Korea? She had no family here, no safety net. Her visa was tied to her employment. Her entire professional existence existed within the gravitational field of this organization, and she had long since accepted that leaving cleanly was a project requiring patience, money. She was slowly accumulating and a timing she hadn't yet found. So she stayed. She worked. She was excellent at her job in the way that people who feel invisible often are, with a fierce private precision that nobody ever complimented because nobody was paying close enough attention to see it. She was cross-referencing procurement invoices against the Q4 asset reports when the sound reached her. Not the rain. She knew the rain. The building's double-glazed windows turned the storm into a low, continuous pressure rather than actual noise, and she had been tuning it out for hours. This was different. a sound like something heavy falling on the floor above. Then a second one, faster. Then what might have been a shout, cut off too quickly to identify the language. Nyla looked up from her screen. The building had security. 42 floors of it, plus dedicated personnel on the roof and in the basement parking structure. The kind of security that didn't exist for a consulting firm. She knew that too. She knew the rotation schedules because she had organized them for 3 years running, knew which guards were reliable and which ones were chronic clock watchers, knew that on Thursday nights, the overnight shift ran lean because Jae-hyun himself had decided, based on historical incident data, that Thursday was statistically the lowest risk night of the week. She had argued with that assessment once in writing in a security review memo that she suspected had been read by exactly nobody. She reached for her desk phone. The main line was dead. She picked up her cell. No signal. The building's internal jamming system, another thing that definitely did not exist in legitimate consulting firms, had been activated. She knew what that meant. She had read the protocol documentation because she had been the one to file it. Someone had triggered a lockdown. Nyla stood up from her desk slowly, the way you moved when your body understood something your brain was still processing. She saved her work automatically, a reflex so ingrained it was practically involuntary. Then she moved to the private corridor that connected the outer office to the executive suite and pressed her palm against the biometric lock. The door clicked open. Kang Jae-hyun's office was the size of a small apartment, all floor-to-ceiling glass on the north and west walls, a view of Seoul at night that was objectively one of the most beautiful things Neela had ever seen, and that she had stopped allowing herself to appreciate because beauty in this building came with too many complications attached. The desk was a single slab of dark walnut positioned to face the door. The furniture was sparse and expensive. There were no photographs anywhere in the room. None. She had noticed that in her first week, and it had told her more about the man than anything she'd read in his file. He was standing at the west window when she entered, facing the city. His jacket was off, his shirt untucked on one side, which was unusual. Jae-hyun was relentlessly precise about his appearance, and he was holding his phone in one hand while the other pressed flat against the glass. He turned when he heard her. Kang Jae-hyun was 37 years old, lean in the way of men who moved through the world like they were conserving energy for the moment it actually mattered. Sharp jaw, dark eyes that processed everything with an impassive quality that most people read as cold, and Nyla had gradually come to understand was something more complicated than that. It was controlled, which was different, though the distinction didn't make it any warmer. He was handsome in the abstract way that men with absolute power often became handsome. The authority arranged his features more attractively than they might have appeared on an ordinary face. He had a scar that ran 2 inches along his left jaw, thin and pale, old enough that most people never noticed it. Nyla had noticed it in her first week. She noticed everything. Nobody noticed that she noticed anything. "Lockdown's active," she said. Not a question. Something moved across his face, not surprise exactly. Surprise was an emotion Jae-hyun appeared to experience only in very small, very controlled doses, but a recalibration, like a machine adjusting for an unexpected variable. She was not supposed to know what a lockdown signal meant. She was officially just his secretary. "Go back to your desk," he said. His English was precise and nearly unaccented, something he had cultivated for business purposes. "Stay away from the windows." "The main lines are down. My cell's jammed. What happened upstairs?" "Nyla." His voice carried the particular quality of a man who was accustomed to instructions being followed without elaboration. "Go back to your desk." She held his gaze for 2 full seconds, which, in her experience with him, was approximately 1.5 seconds longer than most people managed. Then she took 1 step back toward the corridor. That was when the windows on the north wall exploded inward. Not broke. Exploded. A concussive pressure that shattered the reinforced glass into a cascading wall of fragments and sent Nyla stumbling sideways, shoulder catching the edge of the doorframe hard enough to make her vision white at the edges. She didn't fall. She grabbed the frame and held, ears ringing, eyes watering from the sudden howling rush of cold rain-soaked air that tore through the space where the window had been. 3 men came through the opening on rappelling lines. Fast. Practiced. Black tactical gear, suppressed weapons already raised. The first one shot Jae-hyun's head of personal security, before the man had fully risen from the crouch he'd dropped into when the glass went. The body hit the floor with a finality that Nyla's brain registered and then immediately tried to box away into a compartment she'd deal with later, if there was a later. Chae-hyun moved. She had never seen him move like that. In 4 years, she had seen him in boardrooms, in crisis meetings, across negotiating tables where the stakes were things that never appeared in official minutes. He was always controlled, deliberate. Still, in the way of men who had trained themselves not to waste motion. What she saw now was something different, something that had been underneath the control the entire time, and it was terrifying and precise, and somehow even colder than the version she thought she knew. He put down the first attacker in 3 seconds, using a desk chair as an impact weapon, and then his own hands in ways Nyla did not allow herself to watch closely because she was already moving. Not toward the door. The repelling lines meant there were people in the stairwells, had to be. The window breach was a distraction or a secondary entry. But toward the credenza along the east wall where she knew, because she had organized the inventory herself 18 months ago, that Jae-hyun kept a secondary communications unit in a panel behind the third drawer. She had never been meant to know that. She knew it anyway. She pulled the drawer, found the panel release, got it open. The unit was there. Small, hardened, operating on a frequency separate from the building's jammed system. She powered it on. Behind her, something crashed. She didn't look. She focused on the device, found the emergency frequency she had also memorized from a document she had definitely not been meant to read, and transmitted a single coded burst that the protocol documentation described as a priority all units recall. Then a hand closed on her shoulder and spun her around, and she nearly drove her elbow into someone's face before she registered that it was Jae-hyun. His lip was split. There was blood on his collar that she didn't think was from the lip. His eyes were doing that rapid assessment thing she recognized from high-stakes meetings, cataloging the room, cataloging her, cataloging the device in her hands. "You just sent the recall signal," he said. It was not quite a question. "Yes. How do you know that frequency?" "I read the protocol documentation. That documentation is classified." "You left it in the Q3 filing binder," she said, "behind the asset transfer records. I reorganized that binder in March." Something happened in his expression that she didn't have time to interpret because the office door burst open and 2 more men came through it, and everything became very loud and very fast and very small, reduced to the immediate geography of staying alive inside a room that had become suddenly and catastrophically hostile. She dropped behind the credenza. Jae-hyun went the other direction, using the desk as cover. Gunfire. She felt it more than heard it over the ringing that was still radiating from the window explosion, the impact of rounds against the walnut desk, the specific thud of a bullet hitting something that had weight and density. She made herself small and breathed and tried to think. The safe room. She knew it existed. She knew its location because she had been present, entirely invisibly, during a facilities review meeting 8 months ago where the building's security architect had referenced it in passing while discussing emergency response times. The architect had used a grid reference that Nyla had recognized from the building schematics she'd filed the previous year. Sub-level B of the executive floor. Access through the service corridor behind the kitchen. Jae-hyun didn't know she knew that either. She low-crawled from behind the credenza toward the inner corridor door, moving during the moments when the gunfire shifted focus. Her blazer snagged on the corner of an overturned chair, and she yanked it free without slowing. Her reading glasses had come off somewhere, and she didn't stop to find them. The carpet pressed cold and rough against her palms. She reached the corridor. Behind her, she heard a sound that stopped her cold. Not the gunfire. Something wet. Something that had weight to it. She looked back. Jae-hyun was still upright, barely. He'd taken a round somewhere in his left side. She could see it in the way he was holding himself, the arm pressed tight against his ribs, the slight forward lean that meant he was managing pain rather than ignoring it. He was still moving, still fighting, but the quality of his movement had changed. There was a cost to it now that hadn't been there 10 seconds ago. Every rational signal in Nyla's body said keep going. The corridor was clear. The safe room was 90 feet and 2 corners away. She had transmitted the recall. Help was coming. The intelligent thing, the survivable thing, was to move. She went back. She didn't decide to. It wasn't a decision exactly. Her body simply declined to continue in the direction away from him, and by the time her brain registered what she was doing, she was already across the room, shoulder under his arm, taking part of his weight, angling them both toward the corridor entrance, while the last remaining attacker, the others were down, she didn't examine how, tracked his weapon toward them. The round hit the doorframe 6 inches above her head. Then they were through. The corridor was dim, emergency lighting only, strips of pale amber along the baseboards. She had his weight, and she moved with it, not gracefully. There was nothing graceful about half-carrying a man who outweighed her by 60 pounds, while her heart was attempting to exit her body through her sternum. But efficiently, because efficiency was what she had. "Safe room," she said between breaths. "Sub-level B service corridor." "How do you—" He stopped. Reassessed. "Right. Can you do stairs?" "Yes." A beat. "Slowly." "We don't have slowly." Then quickly. His voice had gone tight in a way that told her the pain was significant and that he was not going to say so again regardless of how significant it got. She filed that information and kept moving. The service stairwell was behind the kitchen, accessible through a door marked maintenance in both Korean and English. She hit the push bar and they went through and down, the metal stairs ringing faintly under their feet despite every effort she made to be quiet. One flight, the landing. Another flight. She could hear sounds above them, movement, voices, the systematic quality of a search pattern, and she pushed them faster and felt Jae-hyun's breathing change against her ear, getting controlled in the specific way of someone who was actively managing a pain response. "Almost," she said. "It was the kind of thing you said." "I know." The sub-level corridor was lower and narrower, service infrastructure everywhere, pipes, conduit, the mechanical sound of the building's environmental systems. She found the panel she was looking for on the east wall, behind a section of conduit that was bolted but not welded. There was a recessed handle, a keypad. She didn't know the code. She stood in front of the keypad for exactly 2 seconds, which was as long as she allowed herself. Then she thought about what she knew about Jae-hyun, not the official version, not the public version, what she had assembled across 4 years of invisible proximity to a man who didn't know he was being observed by someone who was actually paying attention. She entered 6 digits. The panel clicked open. Jae-hyun looked at her. Even now, in the low light with blood on his shirt, and his face doing the thing it did when he was containing something that wanted very much to come out, he looked at her with an expression she had never seen on him directed at another person. She didn't have time to figure out what it meant. She got them through the door. The safe room was smaller than she'd pictured. Maybe 12 by 15 feet, reinforced walls, a single overhead light that activated on entry and filled the space with a reddish emergency glow. First aid supplies on one wall. A secondary communications unit, more robust than the one upstairs. Water, rations, a small monitor displaying feeds from security cameras positioned throughout the building. She lowered Jae-hyun onto the single bench along the wall. He sat without protest, which told her more about his current condition than anything he would have said voluntarily. She went for the first aid kit. "You're going to tell me it's not serious," she said, not looking at him, opening the kit and taking inventory. "It's not serious. It went through the side, below the ribs. I need to see it." A silence. Then, in the tone of someone making a significant concession, "Fine." She helped him out of his jacket and shirt, working around the arm he was keeping tight to his body. The wound was in his left flank, entry and exit both present, which was better than the alternative. It was bleeding but not pulsing, which meant no major vessel, which meant she had time to work with. She had no particular medical training beyond a first aid certification she'd renewed annually because her employee handbook required it, and she had never previously applied that certification to an actual human being in an actual emergency. She applied pressure with both hands and breathed through her nose and did not think about how much blood there was. "How did you know the code?" Jae-hyun asked. "I didn't." She kept her hands steady. "I guessed." "Guessed?" "Your mother's birthday," she said. "It's in your personal calendar. You block it every year. No meetings. You've never explained why to any of your staff. I assumed it was significant." Another silence. This one had a different quality. "She died 11 years ago," he said. "I know. I found the death record when I was running background on a sole property acquisition 2 years ago. The property was adjacent to the memorial where she's interred." She looked up at him. I'm sorry, I didn't include it in the acquisition report. He looked at her. The red light made everything look more raw than it was, or maybe exactly as raw as it actually was. His expression was doing the thing she'd never seen it do before. Not just the recalibration, but something under it. Something being disturbed that had been very carefully settled. You've been paying attention, he said. Not an accusation, something closer to a reckoning. I pay attention to everything, she said. It's literally my job. Not to that degree. You never specified a degree. She finished securing the pressure bandage and sat back on her heels. Her hands were shaking slightly. She pressed them flat against her thighs and waited for it to stop. You need proper medical attention. The bleeding's controlled for now, but that won't hold indefinitely. He looked at the monitor. The camera feed showed chaos upstairs. Movement, figures, the aftermath of what had happened on the 42nd floor rendered in the flat gray of security footage. Then a different kind of movement. Organized. His people, she realized. The recall had worked. Units were flooding back into the building. 20 minutes, he said. Medic will be with the first response team. She nodded. 20 minutes. She could work with 20 minutes. She moved to the secondary comm unit and ran a diagnostic, more to have something to do with her hands than because she doubted it was functional. It was functional. She could hear chatter on the security frequency. Korean she followed at an intermediate level she'd never disclosed to anyone in the organization because it had seemed strategically useful to be underestimated. She listened, pieced together what was being said, turned back to Jae-hyun. The attack came from the north stairwell and the roof simultaneously, she said. Someone inside gave them access codes. The roof security panel requires biometric clearance from an executive-level credential. His eyes were on her, steady, that assessment quality focus she recognized from meetings, but directed at her in a way it never had been before. You understand what you're saying. I'm saying someone in your organization sold you out. She met his gaze. I'm saying the people you trust most are exactly the ones you need to look at right now. The sentence landed in the space between them and sat there. She watched him process it, watched the coldness in him do what coldness did when it was the real kind, the kind forged rather than performed. It got very, very still. Your hands are shaking, he said. Yes. Are you afraid? She considered the question with the same exactness she brought to everything. I was afraid when the window exploded. Right now I'm running on something that isn't exactly fear. I'll be afraid again later, probably. Something shifted in his face. Minute, specific. Gone before she could fully read it. You came back, he said. In the office. You were at the door and you came back. Yes. Why? She looked at him. At the blood on the bandage she'd applied. At the city visible on none of the camera feeds because there were no cameras facing outward, only inward, the way this whole organization watched only itself. I don't know, she said, which was true and wasn't. The comms unit crackled, Korean, fast and dense. She parsed enough of it to understand that the building was being secured floor by floor, that the remaining attackers were being contained on 39 and 40, that the executive level was estimated clear in 8 minutes. 8 minutes. She sat on the floor with her back against the wall opposite him, because the bench wasn't long enough for 2 people and she wasn't going to sit next to him right now, not with the adrenaline doing what it was doing to her internal geography. She pulled her knees up and set her forearms on them and breathed. Nyla. She looked up. Jae-hyun was watching her with an expression she could not categorize. His shirt was ruined. The bandage held. He was sitting with the careful stillness of someone managing pain, but his eyes were clear and they were on her with a quality of attention that she had never, in 4 years, 2 months, and some number of days she refused to count, felt from him before. Yes? He opened his mouth, closed it. The expression shifted into something harder, more controlled. She watched him pull the familiar mask back into position. The cool, deliberate executive, the man who processed everything and showed nothing, and felt something in her chest respond to that with a complicated emotion she didn't examine. Nothing, he said. She nodded. The comms crackled again, 3 minutes out. She thought about what she'd said to him, about trust, about credentials, about the inside track that any successful coordinated attack on a facility this secure would require. She thought about what she knew, not what she could prove, not yet, but what the shape of things suggested when you looked at them from the outside with a clear eye and 4 years of careful observation behind you. She thought about who had access to executive-level biometric systems. She thought about a name. She didn't say it out loud. Not yet. Not until she was sure. But she sat in the red-lit room with blood on her hands and her heart still running too fast and looked at the man who had never once, in 4 years, genuinely seen her, and understood that the next 24 hours were going to change everything, including, possibly, herself. The door release activated with a pneumatic hiss. Light from the corridor spilled in. The first medic through the door moved immediately toward Jae-hyun, and Nyla got out of the way, stepping back against the wall, back into the posture she had spent 4 years perfecting, still, peripheral, present without being visible. Old habit. Except Jae-hyun's eyes tracked her across the room as the medic worked, and the expression on his face when he found her in the corner against the wall was not something she recognized from any of the 4 years she'd spent being invisible to him. She looked away first, but standing there in the corner of a room that smelled like blood and recycled air, with Seoul's storm still audible even this far underground, with the weight of what she knew pressing against the inside of her ribs, a name, a pattern, a betrayal taking shape in the architecture of her memory, Nyla Brooks understood with the particular clarity that arrived only in the aftermath of almost dying that her carefully constructed invisibility had, in the last 2 hours, been permanently and irrevocably. The medic's name was Cho, and he worked with the economical speed of someone who had patched up men in worse conditions than this and had learned not to ask questions about how they got that way. He cut away the bandage Nyla had applied, examined the wound with a penlight, and made a sound in the back of his throat that wasn't quite approval, but wasn't alarm either. "Through and through," he said in Korean. "Clean. You'll need sutures and a course of antibiotics. No major structural damage." Jae-hyun said nothing. He was looking at the monitor. Nyla watched from the corner and translated the exchange in her head with the automatic fluency she had spent 3 years developing in private and 0 years disclosing to anyone in this building. She watched Jae-hyun's face while Cho worked, and she watched the monitor, and she thought about the name she was carrying and what it meant, and what she was going to do with it. 2 more men came through the door behind Cho. She recognized one of them, Han Woo-jin, Jae-hyun's chief of operations. A broad-shouldered man in his mid-40s with a face like a closed fist and eyes that moved through rooms the way surveillance cameras did, covering corners, cataloging exits. He took in the safe room in 2 seconds, took in Jae-hyun, took in the bandaging, took in Nyla. His gaze settled on her for slightly longer than necessary. "Boss," he crossed to Jae-hyun, crouched to his eye line. "Building's clear. We have 6 casualties. 3 of ours. 3 unidentified attackers still breathing. The rest are dead." He paused. 17 total came in. "We're accounting for all of them." "Who gave them roof access?" Chae-hyun's voice was level. It was the kind of level that wasn't calm. It was the sound of something very hot being held very still. Woo-jin's jaw tightened. "We're looking at the access logs." "I'm not asking about logs. I'm asking what you know." A beat. "Not yet." Jae-hyun looked at him for 3 seconds. "Get the survivors to the basement. Nobody touches them until I'm there." "You're not," Cho started. "I'll be there in 20 minutes. He looked at the medic. "Finish." Cho finished. He was professional enough not to argue twice. Nyla hadn't moved from the corner. She was waiting to be dismissed or ignored or simply forgotten, the way she usually was when the organization's operational machinery engaged. She became furniture, background, part of the room's infrastructure rather than a person in it. She was waiting for that to happen so she could think. It didn't happen. "Nyla." Jae-hyun was buttoning a clean shirt that Cho's kit had apparently included, his movements careful and deliberate around the newly sutured side. "Come." Woo-jin looked at her again. That same extra beat. She followed Jae-hyun out of the safe room. The corridor outside had been transformed in the time they'd been inside. 4 armed men stood at intervals along the wall, faces she recognized from the security rotation she'd organized. They were all looking at Jae-hyun with the specific expression of men who had nearly lost something they measured their professional existence by and were not yet ready to process what that meant. One of them, young, maybe 25, a cut above his left eye still seeping, looked at Nyla with something that took her a moment to identify. Recognition. Real recognition. Like she was a person rather than a fixture. She filed it away. They took the executive elevator up. Just the two of them. The elevator was mirrored on 3 sides, and she watched Jae-hyun's reflection watch her reflection, and the whole thing had a quality of unreality that she put down to adrenaline come down, and the fact that she hadn't eaten since the convenience store kimbap, which was still going cold on her desk 42 floors above them. "You should eat something," Jae-hyun said. She looked at his actual face instead of the reflection. "I should. There's a kitchen on 38. I'll have someone. I'm fine. You're running on adrenaline and whatever you had for dinner, which based on the container on your desk was approximately 4 pieces of kimbap at some point before 10 p.m. She stared at him. "You know what's on my desk? I walk through the outer office every day. You've never once looked at my desk." The elevator reached 42. The doors opened. He stepped out and she followed, and he said, without turning around, "I look at everything." She almost stopped walking. She didn't. She kept pace and kept her face arranged and filed that too, into the rapidly expanding folder she was building in real time, labeled things I don't know what to do with. The executive floor was a different place from what she'd left 2 hours ago. The north wall of Jae-hyun's office was open to the storm, rain blowing in across the debris of shattered glass and overturned furniture, and things she made herself not look at too closely. Emergency lights had replaced the building's main system. Woo-jin had a team moving through the space with the systematic efficiency of people cleaning up a crime scene, which was exactly what it was. Jae-hyun stood in the doorway of his office and looked at it. His face was doing the closed thing, the controlled thing. She stood beside him because she didn't have anywhere else to go right now, and watched him look at the damage and thought about what it cost a man to look at something like this. The physical evidence of how close it had come, and show nothing. She thought it probably cost a lot. "My desk is salvageable," she said. She didn't know why she said it. He made a sound. It wasn't quite a laugh. It was the almost sound of one, like a shape that had been drawn and then immediately erased. "Good. The Q4 reports are auto-saved. I can have the procurement cross-reference reconstructed by morning." He turned and looked at her. Really looked at her. Up close, in the emergency lighting, with the storm coming in through where the wall used to be, she could see the exhaustion under the control, the places where the mask was sitting on top of something that was tired and had been tired for a long time. "Nyla," he said, quiet. "Stop." She stopped. "You don't have to work right now. I know." "Then stop." She looked at him, the bandaged side, the split lip. The way he was standing with his weight slightly redistributed to compensate for the sutures. She thought about the fact that 4 hours ago she had been cross-referencing procurement invoices, and the biggest problem in her immediate world had been the kimbap going cold. "I found something," she said, "before the attack, in the security logs. I need to tell you something." His expression sharpened, not alarm, something more focused than that. "Not here." He looked at Woo-jin's team moving through the space. "My secondary office, 36th floor." She nodded. They took the stairs this time, no mirrors. She followed him down 6 flights and thought about timing, about when to say the name, about what she needed from him before she said it, about whether there was a version of this conversation that ended with her still employed and not quietly disappeared into whatever mechanism the Black Phoenix Syndicate used to handle inconvenient variables. She thought the odds were reasonable, not excellent, reasonable. The 36th floor secondary office was smaller than the executive suite, a functional space used for overflow meetings and the occasional overnight when Jae-hyun worked too late to bother going home. It had a desk, a couch, a coffee machine, and no windows that opened onto anything an assassin could rappel through, which felt like a meaningful upgrade. Jae-hyun sat on the edge of the desk. He didn't sit behind it. She noticed that. He was positioning himself without the desk as a barrier between them, which was not something she had ever seen him do. She stood. Her legs were tired. She didn't sit. "Tell me," he said. 3 weeks ago," she said, "I was running a routine audit of the building's maintenance logs. It's something I do quarterly. I cross-reference vendor access records against the security camera archives to make sure the logs are internally consistent. That's not part of your job description. No, it's something I do anyway because inconsistencies in vendor logs are the most common vector for. She stopped, looked at him. It doesn't matter why. I do it. 3 weeks ago, I found a gap. She paused, organizing the information. A 47-minute window in the northwest stairwell camera archive where the footage was intact but the metadata timestamps didn't align with the building's master clock. The gap was too small to flag automatically and too precisely executed to be accidental. He was very still. I pulled the vendor access logs for that day. A maintenance contractor came in for HVAC work on sublevels B and C. The paperwork was perfect. Company credentials checked out. But the contractor's access card was logged on sublevel B at the same time the camera gap occurred in the northwest stairwell, which is on the other side of the building. She looked at him. Same contractor came back twice more in the following 2 weeks. Different job tickets each time, different sublevels. The camera gaps followed the same pattern. Someone was mapping the system, Jae-hyun said. His voice had gone very quiet. Not soft. The opposite of soft. More than that, the gaps weren't in the camera feeds themselves. The cameras kept recording. What was modified was the access control integration, the system that cross-references badge readers against camera positions. Someone was teaching the building's security AI to not notice certain credential types in certain locations. She took a breath. Tonight's attackers knew exactly where the roof access panel was. They knew the biometric clearance sequence for the executive stairwell. They knew the location of the primary safe room. She looked at him steadily. The primary safe room, Jae-hyun, the one your people went to first. It's not on any official documentation. His jaw did something, a muscle moving, controlled. You said primary. You knew there was a secondary. I found a reference to the sublevel installation in a contractor invoice from 3 years ago, filed under general maintenance. Easy to miss. But you didn't miss it. I don't miss things. He stood up from the desk, moved to the window. This one looked out over the city's southern quarter, Hanam-dong in the distance, the Han River a dark band beyond it. The storm was beginning to exhaust itself, rain thinning, the worst of it tracking east. The credential access, he said, his back to her. Executive-level biometric. Who has that clearance? Here it was. She had known this moment was coming since the safe room, had been building toward it and dreading it with equal force. 12 people, she said. I have the list memorized. Narrow it. The maintenance contractor's company, I checked the registration. It's a shell. 3 layers deep, but the original incorporation filing lists a nominee director who's connected to a holding company that received a series of wire transfers 18 months ago from an account I traced to a financial intermediary used by the Jongseon Group. The name landed in the room like a physical thing. She watched his shoulders change. The Jongseon Group was the rival syndicate that had been systematically moving against Black Phoenix's northern territories for 2 years. Neela knew this from documents she had processed, meetings she had sat outside of, conversations she had absorbed from her desk without ever indicating she understood a word. The 12 people with executive biometric clearance, she continued, her voice steady even though her hands wanted to shake again. 7 of them are operational staff who have been with the organization for over a decade. Their financial records are clean. I cross-referenced against public filings where I could access them. 3 of the remaining 5 have minor anomalies that I'd attribute to ordinary financial messiness rather than anything structural. She stopped. That leaves 2. He turned around. His face was the closed thing. The mask. But his eyes were doing the opposite of closed. They were doing something intense and fixed that she had to work to hold without looking away. One of them, she said, is a logistics coordinator named Park Yeon-soo who started 14 months ago, and whose personnel file I cannot fully verify because 2 of his 3 listed prior employers ceased operations within 6 months of his hire date, which is a pattern I find statistically implausible. A silence. And the second, Jae-hyun said. Not a question. He already knew there was a second. He was giving her the space to say it. She said it. Seomina. The room didn't change. The storm outside continued thinning. The city lights continued their indifferent glitter across the southern quarter. Nothing in the physical environment responded to the name. But Jae-hyun's face did something she had never seen it do. It went, for approximately 4 seconds, entirely blank. Not controlled. Not masked. Blank. The look of a man whose processing system had encountered something it genuinely could not immediately route. Seo Min-ah was the widow of Kang Dae-hyun, Jae-hyun's older brother. Dae-hyun had died 3 years ago in what the official record described as a cardiac event, and what Nyla suspected, from context she had assembled over time, was something more complicated. Mina had remained within the organization's inner circle after the death. She had resources, access, and this was the part Nyla had spent the most time sitting with: grief. Real grief, or what had looked like it. Nyla had processed the condolence correspondence, had organized the arrangements, had watched Mina at the 3 organizational events per year where her presence was expected, and had thought, that woman is carrying something heavy. She had not until 3 weeks ago considered that the weight might be betrayal rather than loss. "Show me," Jae-hyun said. His voice was a register lower than usual. "I have documentation. Encrypted files on my personal drive, separate from the building's system. I started compiling when I found the first camera gap." She met his eyes. "I kept it off the network because I didn't know yet how deep it went or who I could give it to." Something moved across his face. "You didn't know if you could trust me. I didn't know if what I found would reach you unmodified. That's different." He looked at her for a long moment. Then, "Where's the drive?" "My bag. Under my desk." He moved to the door. She followed. They went back up to 42 and through the still active cleanup operation, and she ignored Woo Jin's eyes on her back as she retrieved her bag from under her desk, which was, as she'd told Jae-hyun, completely undamaged, the one island of order in a room that had been reorganized by violence, and pulled out a small encrypted drive and handed it to him. He turned it over in his hands, looked at it, looked at her. "How long?" he said. "Have you been doing this? Building files, tracking anomalies, compiling things you weren't supposed to know?" She thought about how honest to be, decided that they were probably past the point where strategic honesty was useful. The security audit started 3 weeks ago. Before that, she paused. "I noticed things. I didn't formalize them. Things about the organization. Things about everything." She held his gaze. "I'm very good at my job, Jae-hyun. The job you think I do, and the job I actually do." A beat. "And what's the job you actually do?" "I keep this organization running. Not just the calendar and the travel arrangements and the procurement cross-references." She gestured, a small controlled motion, taking in the building, the empire, the whole machinery. "I track the irregularities that fall through everyone else's cracks because I'm the one person in this building that nobody watches. The vendors who don't match their invoices. The staff members whose timesheets don't align with the camera archives. The discrepancies in fuel consumption reports that suggest vehicles are being used off-book." She stopped. "I've been doing it for 2 years. I flagged 8 internal irregularities that I then watched get independently discovered and resolved through official channels. I never took credit. I just—" She stopped again. "Kept doing it," he said. "Yes." He was looking at her the way he'd looked at her in the safe room, like something had been restructured in his understanding of the room's geometry, and he was reorienting. "Why?" She opened her mouth, closed it, thought about the real answer and how small and unimpressive it was, how it didn't fit into the architecture of this conversation. "Because it needed doing," she said finally, "and I could do it, and no one else was." Woo Jin appeared in the doorway. He looked between them with an expression that was professional enough to almost conceal what was underneath it, a question he hadn't decided yet whether to ask. "Boss, the survivors are ready." Jae-hyun pocketed the drive. "I'll be there." He looked at Nyla. "Go to 38. There's a staff lounge. Use it. Sleep if you can. I'll need you tomorrow." She nodded. He left with Woo Jin. She stood in her damaged outer office and listened to the storm finishing itself outside and thought about Min-ah and what it meant and what was going to happen next and whether the shape of things she'd been quietly mapping for 2 years was about to become real in a way she couldn't take back. She picked up the cold kimbap from her desk. She ate it, all of it. She needed to be functional tomorrow. She needed to be sharp and present and invisible in all the right ways, and visible in the specific way that had apparently been happening without her consciously choosing it. She was gathering her bag when Wu Jin reappeared in the doorway, alone this time. She looked at him. He looked at her. The cut above his eye had been closed with a butterfly strip. His face was doing the closed fist thing it always did, but there was something operating underneath it tonight that hadn't been there before when he looked at her. "You transmitted the recall from the executive suite," he said. His Korean was level and deliberate, the way of someone who had decided on a register. She answered in English. "Yes." A flicker. He switched to English without comment. "How did you know the frequency?" "Protocol documentation." "That document was classified. I know. I found it in a misfiled binder in March." She held his gaze. "I flagged the misfiling in an internal memo." He stared at her. "I don't recall any such memo." "No," she said. "You didn't." The silence between them had texture. "You've been in this building for 4 years," he said. 4 years, 2 months. "And in that time you have apparently been doing my job," she said, "very thoroughly." His expression shifted. It was not quite a threat. It was the antechamber of one, the look of a man who was reassessing a variable he'd been comfortable ignoring and was not yet certain whether the reassessment made that variable an asset or a problem. "The boss trusts you," he said. It landed like something other than a compliment. "He trusted me enough to follow me to the safe room," she said. "Another shift. Smaller." "You led him there?" "Yes." "How did you know about it?" "Contractor invoice 3 years ago." She tilted her head slightly. "I have a very good memory, Wu Jin." He looked at her for a long moment, the kind of look that was taking inventory. Then he turned and walked away without another word, footsteps deliberate on the ruined carpet. She watched him go and thought about the fact that Wu Jin had executive biometric clearance, had been with the organization for 11 years, had financial records she had described to Jae-hyun as clean, and they were, superficially, in the public-facing data she'd been able to access. She thought about what she hadn't said, what she was still carrying. She thought about the fact that she had given Jae-hyun 2 names, a logistics coordinator who'd been there 14 months, and a grieving woman. And she thought about whether she had given him those 2 names because they were the 2 that her evidence most clearly pointed toward, which was true, or whether she had given him those 2 because there was a third pattern she hadn't finished tracing yet. A financial thread that didn't lead to either of them, that went somewhere else, somewhere closer to the center. She wasn't sure enough yet. She needed to be sure. She went to 38, found the staff lounge, sat on a couch that was too short for sleeping, and opened her laptop with the secondary drive she kept in her bag's hidden pocket. Not the one she'd given Jae-hyun, a separate one, a backup copy she made of everything because she had learned a long time ago that the only person reliably protecting her interests was herself, and started pulling the financial thread. Outside, the storm finally stopped. Inside, on the screen in front of her, a number appeared that connected a holding company to a wire transfer to an account she recognized, and the recognition hit her so hard she had to set the laptop down and breathe for a moment against the understanding of what she was looking at. It wasn't just Min Ah. It was Minna and someone else. Someone who had been in the building tonight with a weapon and loyalty that was pointed in 2 directions at once, and Nyla was the only person alive who currently knew it. She reached for her phone to call Jae-hyun. No signal. The building's internal comms were still jammed in sectors while the security sweep completed. She looked at the screen, looked at the number, looked at the name attached to the account on the other end of the wire transfer, looked at the timestamp on the transfer, 4 days ago, which meant whoever it was hadn't gotten what they needed yet, which meant tonight wasn't the end of it, which meant the next move was already in motion, and she was sitting alone on a couch on the 38th floor of a building that had just been attacked, with information that made her— She understood this with a cold, clear certainty that settled over her like a change in air pressure. The most dangerous person in the organization right now. Not because she could fight, because of what she knew. She sat with that for exactly 30 seconds, counted them. It was something she did when her mind wanted to sprint in 6 directions at once. She gave herself a fixed interval of stillness and let the panic complete its circuit without acting on it. 30 seconds. Then she picked up the laptop and looked at the screen again with the specific quality of attention that had kept her functional in this building for 4 years, 2 months, and a number of days she was now actively counting, because it turned out they mattered. The wire transfer had originated from an account registered to a holding company called Seon Ha Capital Partners. 3 layers of corporate structure sat between Seon Ha and the account that had received the transfer, and she had burned through all 3 layers in 11 minutes using the financial database access she had quietly maintained since discovering the organization's true nature. The receiving account, the one that Seon Ha's money had landed in 4 days ago, in a transfer that was precisely sized to fall below the automated flagging threshold, belonged to a shell entity called DH Consulting Services. DH. She had stared at those 2 letters for a full minute before her memory delivered what she already knew and had been refusing to look at directly. DH Consulting Services had appeared in one previous document in her years of meticulous filing, a vendor payment authorization from 22 months ago signed by Woo Jin for consulting services she had never been able to match to a corresponding project or deliverable. She had flagged it in an internal memo. Nobody had responded. She understood now why nobody had responded. She closed the laptop, opened it again, thought about what she was sitting with. Minna's security blind spots, verifiable and documented. Park Yeon-soo's implausible employment history, verifiable with more time. And underneath both of them, connected by a financial thread thin enough to miss and obvious enough to be devastating once you saw it, Woo Jin. 11 years with the organization, executive biometric clearance, a man who had looked at her in the corridor tonight with an expression she had identified as threat assessment and now understood was something more specific than that. He had been assessing how much she knew. She needed to reach Jae-hyun, now. Not through the building's compromised comm system, not through any channel that Woo Jin had administrative access to, which was most of them, because Woo Jin was chief of operations and administrative access was exactly what that title meant. She thought about her options, organized them by risk, rejected 2, settled on the 3rd, which was also the one she least wanted to take because it required her to move through the building alone, at 3 in the morning, with a security sweep still in progress, and at least one person in the organization who now had direct operational reasons to want her to stop knowing what she knew. She put the secondary drive in her bra. Not her bag. Not a pocket. The most immediately accessible concealed location on her body, because if someone was going to search her, she needed to know it was happening before they got there. She left the staff lounge. The 38th floor was quiet. The emergency lighting had stabilized into something less dramatic than the immediate post-attack chaos. Amber strips along the corridor walls, the occasional sweep of a flashlight from a security team working a room 2 or 3 doors ahead. She moved in the opposite direction, toward the east stairwell, keeping her footsteps deliberate and her posture in the specific configuration she had observed in every authorized staff member moving through this building on a working night. Purposeful, slightly hurried, carrying the invisible credential of someone who had somewhere to be. She had watched people move through this building for 4 years. She knew every permission signal. She had never needed to use them herself. She used them now. The basement was a different organism from the executive levels. Utilitarian, concrete and conduit, and the specific smell of a large building's mechanical systems working hard underneath the presentable face it showed to the world. She knew from the security rotation that the overnight team kept 2 men on the basement entry to the interrogation space. She had filed those rotation documents without ever once using that word in her own head, because using accurate words for things in this organization had always felt like a door she didn't want to open. She used the word now. Interrogation. Chae-hyun was down here questioning the men who had survived the attack, and she needed to get to him before Woo Jin managed any part of what got said in that room. The 2 guards at the corridor entrance knew her face. That was the thing about being invisible for 4 years. She knew everyone, and everyone knew her. They just didn't think about her, which was almost the same as invisibility, but not quite. She had their names in her memory, had organized their timesheets, and approved their equipment requisitions. She walked toward them with the laptop under her arm and the expression of a woman who was exhausted and annoyed and delivering something that couldn't wait. "He needs this," she said, holding up the laptop. English, then Korean. "Something on the drive," he said now. The taller guard looked at her, looked at the laptop, made a decision based on 4 years of her presence in this building and the context of a night during which everything normal had already collapsed. He stepped aside. She went through. The corridor beyond was longer than it looked from the entrance, turning twice before opening into a space she had never been inside and had only known existed from a facility's blueprint she'd processed 18 months ago. It was not what she had imagined. She didn't know what she had imagined. Something cinematic, perhaps, something that looked like what it was. Instead, it was a large room with concrete walls and inadequate lighting, and 3 men zip-tied to chairs, none of them looking like they had many hours left regardless of what happened next. And Jae-hyun standing in the center of the space with his jacket on and his face doing the truly cold thing, the thing that wasn't a mask because masks implied something underneath that needed concealing. This was just him, unmediated, and it was the most frightening version of him she had encountered in 4 years. He looked at her when she came through the door, and his expression shifted into something that wasn't quite the executive coldness. Something more complicated, more immediate. "What are you doing down here?" "I need to talk to you. Now. Alone." She looked at the 2 men standing against the wall behind the chairs. Not the zip-tied men, the standing ones, his people, armed. She looked at Jae-hyun. "Please," something in her voice. She could hear it herself. Not panic. She wasn't panicking, but the particular quality of controlled urgency that she had never in 4 years directed at him, and that apparently meant something because he read it in 1 second and turned to the 2 men against the wall and said a single word in Korean that sent them out of the room. He looked at her. "Woo-jin," she said. A silence that had physical weight. She opened the laptop, walked it over to him, showed him the transfer, the timeline, the account names, the corporate layers, the vendor authorization from 22 months ago with his chief of operations signature at the bottom. She walked him through it the way she walked through everything, methodically, without editorializing, laying the structure and letting the structure speak. He didn't interrupt. He had the ability, she had noticed over 4 years, to receive information without his face becoming part of the delivery. He stayed separate from it while it came in, processed it somewhere interior, and only then let his response form. She had always found it somewhat inhuman. Right now she was grateful for it. When she finished, he was quiet for approximately 10 seconds. Then he said, "How sure are you?" "The financial connection is definitive. The vendor authorization is documented. The behavioral pattern over the last 8 weeks." She stopped. "I'm sure." Another silence. "He's been with me for 11 years, Jae-hyun said. His voice was level, the dangerous kind of level. "I know. He was with my brother before me." She didn't say anything. There wasn't anything to say to that. Jae-hyun closed the laptop. His hands on the lid were perfectly still, which she recognized as significant. Stillness in his hands, when his face was doing what it was doing, was the equivalent of a visible tremor in anyone else. He was holding something down. "Where is he now?" he asked. "I don't know. He walked away from my office approximately 40 minutes ago." "He knows you know. I think he suspects. I didn't." She thought back through the conversation with Woo-jin in the outer office. The questions he'd asked. The specific questions. The inventory-taking quality of his attention. "I didn't confirm anything. But he's smart, and he's been watching this organization operate for 11 years. He knows what I'm capable of if he's been paying any attention." "He hasn't," Jae-hyun said. "That's the only reason you're standing here." Before she could respond, the lights in the room went out. Not dimmed. Off. Total darkness. Instantaneous. The kind that pressed against your eyes and made your other senses lurch sideways to compensate. Nyla stood completely still, because moving in a room she didn't fully know the geography of, in absolute darkness, was how you walked into a wall, or a zip-tied man, or the edge of something metal. She stayed still, and she listened. Footsteps. From the direction she'd entered. Then Jae-hyun's hand found her arm in the dark, grip firm and immediate, and he was moving and she moved with him, letting him navigate because he knew this room better than she did, both of them moving fast and low toward the back wall. A door opened. Not the one she'd come through. Another one, set into the concrete in the back corner that she hadn't seen because it was flush with the wall and had no visible handle from the approach angle. His hand found it in the dark, the way you found something you'd touched 1,000 times without looking. They went through. The space beyond was smaller, storage. She could tell from the smell, old paper, metal, the specific airless quality of a room that was opened rarely. A thin thread of emergency lighting from somewhere above a vent was the only source of visibility, and it was barely that. Jae-hyun put his back against the door they'd come through, and she heard, rather than saw him, pull something from inside his jacket. A weapon. She didn't ask. "The comm system is back online in sections," he said, low. "Whoever cut the power to this floor did it from a local junction. That means they were already in the building." "Or never left it," she said. A beat. "The survivors," she said. "The 3 men in the chairs. They came in with 17. You're accounting for all of them. That's what Woo Jin told you, but Woo Jin controlled the body count." She pressed her back against the opposite wall. "What if the accounting is wrong? What if one of them isn't—" "Stop." His voice was sharp and very quiet. "I know." She stopped. They stood in the dark storage room with the door between them and whatever was moving through the basement corridor beyond, and Nyla tried to make her breathing quieter and tried to think, and tried not to think about the fact that the drive with everything she'd compiled was pressed against her skin, and that made her the only external backup of information that could bring down the entire coordinated structure of what had happened tonight, which made her the most logical target in the room, which was a thought she put firmly into a box and sat on. On the other side of the door, something moved. She could hear it. Not the sound of authorized personnel moving with purpose, but the careful movement of someone managing their sound footprint. Slow, deliberate, the footsteps of someone who believed they were hunting. Jae-hyun moved from the door to her side of the room in 2 steps. He was right next to her now, close enough that she could feel the warmth of him in the cold space, and he put his mouth close to her ear. "Second junction box is in the east corridor. If they cut main power, the emergency system stays on separate circuits. Someone who knows this building knows to cut the junction first." His breath was warm against her temple. Woo Jin designed this building's power contingency layout. She turned her head slightly. His face was an inch from hers in the dark. "The survivors are compromised." "Yes." "The security sweep team." Woo Jin assembled it. She understood the full shape of it. The sweep hadn't been securing the building. It had been positioned throughout the building, giving eyes on every floor, creating an interior network under the guise of post-attack protocol. How many of the sweep team were his? She didn't know. She thought about the guard who had looked at her with recognition outside the safe room. The young one with the cut above his eye. Had he been Woo Jin's? The footsteps outside the door stopped, directly outside the door. She felt Jae-hyun's grip adjust on the weapon. She didn't move. She didn't breathe. The handle turned. The door opened inward, emergency vent light falling across the entry in a thin triangle. A figure came through it, dark clothes, weapon raised, moving in the trained pattern of a room clear. Professional. Not one of the zip-tied survivors. Someone who had been inside this building all night. Someone from the sweep team. Jae-hyun was already moving. It was over in 4 seconds, and the specifics of it Nyla put in the box with everything else she was not examining right now. The man was on the floor. Jae-hyun had his radio. Static. Then a voice. Woo Jin's voice, clipped and operational. "B corridor clear. Status on the package." The package. Nyla didn't let herself react to that. Jae-hyun pressed the transmit key twice without speaking. She watched him listen to the response. Another brief burst of static, then silence. And watched his face in the thin light do the thing where it got very, very still. He looked at her. "He thinks you're the package," she said. It wasn't a question. "No." Jae-hyun's voice was a controlled thing, assembled from something that wanted to be the opposite of controlled. "You are." She held that. "Minna is secondary," he said. She provided access. The blind spots, the credential mapping, that was her operational contribution. But the objective tonight wasn't killing me. He looked at her. "It was taking you." She opened her mouth, closed it. Her mind moved through it quickly, because she had to. The resequencing of what she'd believed was happening against what was apparently true. "Because they knew I'd found something. Because someone told them what you were capable of. What you'd been doing for 2 years. He looked at her with an expression that in the thin emergency light she could not fully read. Someone who knew. Wu Jin couldn't have known. I never disclosed. How long has your desk been in that office? 4 years. And how long has Wu Jin been walking past it? She stopped, thought about it, thought about all the things she had done at that desk. The cross-references, the parallel financial screens, the quiet systematic work that she had believed was invisible because she was invisible, the memos she'd sent into the void, the anomalies she'd flagged through official channels, the ones that Wu Jin had administrative oversight of, the ones that had always been addressed through official channels in ways that never required anyone to acknowledge where the initial flag had come from. He had known, not the specifics maybe, not the accumulated archive, but he had known she was more than what she appeared, and he had managed her from a distance the same way she had managed everything from a distance, quietly, without drawing attention to the management. The difference was he had a 7-month head start on tonight. He set up the attack, she said, hearing herself say it, not just as a hit on you, as a mechanism to extract me before I found him. Before you found all 3 of them, Jae-hyun said. She looked at him. There's a third. Park Yeon-soo isn't a logistics coordinator from Busan. His real name is in a file Dae-hyun, my brother, had compiled before he died, a file I've been looking for 3 years. Something moved in his face. My brother found out about Wu Jin. That's why my brother is dead. The cardiac event, the official record. She looked at Jae-hyun in the thin light, and she saw, for the first time, the full weight of what 11 years of loyalty to the wrong person actually looked like from the inside. The specific grief of it. The way it sat differently than ordinary betrayal because it had been built so slowly, maintained so carefully, dressed in so many real moments of what must have felt like genuine trust. I'm sorry, she said, the way she'd said it in the safe room about his mother. Quiet. Meaning it. He looked at her. Don't apologize to me. His voice was rougher than she'd heard it. I should have seen it. I should have. He stopped. His jaw worked. You saw it in 3 weeks. I had 11 years and I didn't see it. You weren't looking for it. I should have been. You trusted him. That's not an excuse. No, she agreed. It's not, but it's human. He looked at her for a beat that lasted longer than it should have. Then he stepped back, pulled the operational register back on like a coat. She watched him do it, and this time she understood it differently. Not as coldness, but as the only mechanism he had for continuing to function. You put the mask on, or you stopped moving, and stopping wasn't an option. We need to get out of the basement, he said. Wu Jin has eyes on every stairwell in his sweep pattern. There are 2 blind spots. South service elevator and the maintenance crawl access on B2, she said. He looked at her. I reorganized the facility's layout documentation 14 months ago, she said. There was a section on access redundancies. Something crossed his face that was almost the shape of the almost laugh she'd heard in his ruined office. Of course there was. He picked up the radio. South service elevator, we go up to street level. I have a secondary location 3 blocks east, but not a building asset, personal, off any record Wu Jin has access to. And then? And then we figure out who we can trust. He looked at her. You and I. She nodded. 2 people. In a building full of compromised positions and an enemy who had 11 years of institutional knowledge and had spent the last 7 months engineering this moment. She thought about Min-ah, about whether Min-ah understood what she'd put in motion, whether she was a grieving woman who had been leveraged into something she hadn't fully understood, or a calculating actor who had made a deliberate choice. She thought about Dae-hyun, about the file he'd compiled, about a man who had found out the truth and died for it before he could do anything with what he knew. She thought about the drive pressed against her skin and what it contained and what it meant to be the only external copy of that information. Move, Jae-hyun said. She moved. They went through the storage room's back access, another door, flush-mounted, because Wu Jin had designed this level's contingency layout, and Jae-hyun had apparently done what people who trust do and absorbed that knowledge without examining it for angles. And into a service corridor that smelled of pipe insulation and cold concrete. Jae-hyun moved ahead of her, weapon ready, and she followed in the specific posture she'd been refining all night, without consciously knowing she was refining it. Close, quiet, watching the angles he wasn't watching, her body learning in real time what it meant to move through hostile space. She had never done this before tonight. She had been doing it for hours. The South Service elevator was where she knew it would be. Jae-hyun hit the call button and they stood in the thin corridor and waited, and she listened to the building around them. The sounds of an organism that had been invaded and was still processing the invasion. Somewhere above, movement. Woojin's sweep, repositioning. The elevator arrived. They got in. As the doors closed, Jae-hyun's phone, not the jammed one, a secondary she hadn't known about, lit up with an incoming message. He looked at it. His face went to the blank place again. The 4-second processing blank she'd seen in the secondary office when she'd said Minna's name. He turned the phone so she could see the screen. A photograph. The image was grainy, low light, clearly pulled from a security camera. It showed Nyla's apartment building. Her building, in Mapogu, 30 minutes from the KH Holdings Tower, with 3 figures moving toward the entrance. The timestamp was 17 minutes ago. Below the photo, a message in Korean, 4 words. She translated them in her head without needing to. We have what matters. She looked at Jae-hyun. He looked at her. The elevator rose. I have a cat, she said. The words came out strange, flattened. Mrs. O across the hall feeds her when I work late. Jae-hyun looked at her face and something shifted in his. Not the controlled thing, something underneath it that had no official name in the vocabulary of a man who had spent decades building walls. Nyla, it's not about the cat. She pressed the heels of her hands against her eyes for 2 seconds, put them down, breathed. It's the external drive, my apartment. I have a 3rd backup on a home server. If they're in my apartment, they're going to find it. And when they find it, they'll know exactly what I know and exactly what I don't know, and they'll close the gaps before we can use any of it. She looked at the floor indicator, 12 floors from street level. We have to go to my apartment, she said. That's exactly where they want us. I know. She looked at him. But if they get that server, the only copies left are what's on the drive I gave you and what I have on me. And if they know that, Jae-hyun... She stopped, said the thing she'd been saying only to herself since she'd put the secondary drive in her bra on the 38th floor. Then I'm not a package anymore. I'm just a liability. The elevator reached street level. The doors opened onto a service bay, and the cold early morning air and the distant sound of Seoul beginning somewhere far above to wake up without any knowledge of what had happened in the tower above it. Jae-hyun stepped out. She stepped out. He looked both directions down the service alley and then back at her. We go to the secondary location first, he said. We regroup. We assess. He held her gaze. We are not walking into that apartment, Jae-hyun said, without knowing what's waiting on every floor. Nyla looked at him across the service alley. The cold hit her properly for the first time. She'd been running too hot inside to feel it, adrenaline doing what it did to the body's thermostat, but out here in the pre-dawn air of Seoul with the storm gone and the city still mostly dark, it arrived all at once. She had no coat. Her blazer was torn at the left shoulder from the corridor escape. She was wearing reading glasses she'd found in her jacket pocket and did not remember putting back on. Then we need what's in the secondary location first, she said. You said you had resources there. I have weapons, comms equipment, a vehicle. And people you trust? He was quiet for 1 second too long. Right, she said. They moved. The secondary location was 3 blocks east and 1 block south. A narrow building wedged between a parking structure and a closed restaurant supply warehouse. The kind of address that didn't exist in any organizational record because Jae-hyun had acquired it personally 7 years ago through a chain of ownership so deliberately unremarkable that it would take a thorough investigator months to trace. He told her none of this. She'd found it the way she found everything. A payment authorization buried in a personal expense reconciliation, filed under miscellaneous property, cross-referenced against a city planning database she'd accessed for a different purpose entirely. She had never had reason to mention it to him. She did not mention having known it now. The building's street entrance was an unmarked door, gray steel, no handle on the outside. Jae-hyun pressed a specific pattern on what looked like a structural rivet plate beside the frame. The door released. They went in. The interior was one room, maybe 400 square feet, low ceiling, the smell of clean mechanical equipment and something faintly chemical she identified as gun solvent. A cot, a workbench with communications hardware, a gun safe, open, several weapons visible, a laptop on the bench, isolated, not networked to anything external. A black duffel bag hung from a hook near the door. Jae-hyun moved to the communications equipment. She moved to the laptop because that was what she did. "I need internet access," she said. "Isolated, not the building system." He pulled a device from a shelf above the workbench, a hardware VPN unit, the kind that created an encrypted tunnel through mobile data rather than fixed infrastructure. He set it on the bench beside her. She plugged in, connected, and started moving. The home server in her apartment had remote access capability. She had built it that way deliberately, because she was a person who planned for contingencies, a habit she had developed in the specific way of people who learned early that the only reliable safety net was the one they built themselves. She navigated to the access portal with the secondary drive's authentication credentials and hit the login sequence. Access denied. She tried again. Different credentials. The backup authentication. Access denied. She sat with her hands on the keyboard and felt the specific quality of cold that had nothing to do with temperature. "They're already in the server," she said. "They've locked me out." Jae-hyun was on the comms unit, running frequencies. He looked over. What did they get? Everything on the home server, the full compiled archive, 2 years of anomaly documentation, the financial threads, the contractor analysis, the camera metadata. She thought through it. Everything except what's on the drive I gave you and the secondary on me. So they know what you know. And what I was still working toward, yes. She closed the laptop, looked at the wall. They'll also know I didn't have Woo Jin's connection fully documented yet. The DH consulting thread. I found it tonight. It wouldn't be on the home server. It's only on the secondary drive. Which means they think the picture they have is complete. Which means they don't know about Dae-hyun's file. Jae-hyun turned from the comms unit. His face had the operational quality locked in now, the grief and the fury both compressed into fuel. Dae-hyun's file was on a physical drive, not networked. I've been looking for it for 3 years. I knew it existed because of how he died, the timing of it, the specific things that happened in the weeks before. He found Woo Jin. He was compiling evidence. The drive went missing the same night he did. Woo Jin has it. Woo Jin thinks he has it. Something moved in his eyes. I found it 8 months ago. In a safe deposit box Dae-hyun registered under our mother's name. He looked at her. I've been carrying what's on it for 8 months, waiting for the right moment, waiting until I was certain enough about who else was involved. A pause. I wasn't certain about Woo Jin until tonight. I had suspicions. I needed confirmation. She stared at him. You've known about Min Ah. Since 6 months ago, yes. And Park Yeon-soo. Since 4 months ago. She stood up from the bench. You were building a case. Yes. And you didn't... She stopped, reorganized. You didn't tell anyone. There was no one to tell. His voice was flat. The 3 people I would have told were the 3 people I was building it against. She sat with that. With the image of him carrying it for 8 months alone, going to work each day with Woo Jin, attending meetings chaired by Woo Jin, receiving security briefings from Woo Jin, understanding that the man standing behind him in every room had killed his brother and was patiently engineering his destruction and doing nothing except watching and waiting and collecting evidence like she had been doing, separately, in parallel, without knowing the other was doing the same thing. You're not as different from me as you thought, she said. He looked at her. The corners of his mouth did something that wasn't quite a smile, but was the closest she'd seen in a sustained period of crisis. No. The comms unit crackled. A voice, Korean, one of the sweep team frequencies she recognized from earlier. The voice said a location, then a name. Jae-hyun's expression went from almost smile to something that had no warmth in it at all. Min-ah is at your apartment, he said. Nyla had already put her jacket back on. I know, I understood. He looked at her. You don't have to, the server's compromised. The archive is gone. What I have on the 2 drives and what you have from Dae-hyun's file. That's what we're working with. She picked up the secondary drive from where she'd set it on the bench and put it back where it had been, against her skin. If we don't move now, before they finish extracting what's on the home server, they'll realize the DH consulting thread isn't there. They'll know what we still have. And then the window closes. He looked at her for 3 seconds. The assessment look. But different now. Not the kind that was deciding what category to put her in, the kind that was looking at something it had already categorized and was still slightly astonished by the category. "Okay," he said. He went to the gun safe. She watched him assess the options with the efficiency of someone who had done this many times, and then she said, "I don't know how to use one," before he could reach any conclusions about equipping her. "I know." "Then don't give me one. I'm more dangerous with a network connection in 30 minutes than with something I'd probably shoot myself with." He looked at her over his shoulder. "Noted." He selected 2 weapons and secured them. Then he reached into the duffel bag on the wall hook and pulled out a small device. Not a phone, something smaller, a dedicated transmitter, and held it out to her. "Emergency burst transmitter, single button, sends a location ping to a frequency that goes to exactly one person." "Who?" "A man named Cha In-soo. He was my brother's oldest ally. The only person I'm certain Woojin doesn't have leverage on, because Woojin doesn't know he exists." He met her eyes. "He'll respond within 6 minutes of a ping. He'll come with enough people to end this." She took the transmitter. "Why haven't you used it already?" "Because I needed evidence first. Cha In-soo is not a man who moves on suspicion. He moves on certainty." He looked at the drives, the one in his jacket, the awareness of the one against her skin. "Now we have certainty. So ping him now." "I will. When we're inside. When there's no possibility of them seeing the response team mobilize and disappearing before they get there." He checked his weapon. "We need them in one place." "And Minna." "Yes." His jaw set. "And Minna." They left the secondary location at 4:19 a.m. The city was the kind of quiet that Seoul only achieved in the specific window between the night's last activity and the morning's first. A temporary peace that felt like held breath. They took the vehicle from the building's narrow attached garage, a car so aggressively ordinary that it was its own kind of concealment, and drove without headlights for the first block until Jae-hyun was certain of the street. Nyla sat in the passenger seat and watched the city move past, and tried to do what she always did with the time between decisions. Use it to think rather than feel. She thought about the apartment. The layout she knew perfectly, because she had lived in it for 3 years, and she knew every space she occupied with the same thoroughness she brought to everything. 3 rooms. Entry corridor, open kitchen living space, bedroom. Building had 12 floors. Her unit was on the 7th. 2 stairwells, 1 elevator. The fire escape ran along the north face. She thought about what 3 people in her apartment at 4 in the morning were there to do. Not destroy the server. They'd have done that remotely. They were there because they thought she might come back for it. They were there for her. "How many do you think?" she asked. "At least 4. Minna won't have come with fewer." He kept his eyes on the road. "She's not operational herself. She provides access, coordinates, leverages the position she held in the organization. The people with her will be Woojins on loan, or Jongseon Group, which is worse because they're professionals, and they don't know this city's patterns the way our people do." "What's the difference in how we handle it?" He glanced at her. "I'm not sure what you mean by we in that sentence. I mean, what's the difference in how you handle it, and what I'm doing while you do?" He thought about it. "Can you access the building systems remotely?" "My building?" "Any building." She thought about the tools she had on the secondary drive, the access credentials she'd accumulated over 2 years of security audits, some of which were definitely not limited to the KH Holdings network. "Depends on the building." "Your building?" 3 years as a resident, management access, maintenance systems. The building management uses a standard commercial system. I helped Mrs. O on the 4th floor file a maintenance complaint 6 months ago, and I accessed the tenant portal from her account because she couldn't remember her login. She paused. "I may have noted the administrative back door while I was in there." Jae-hyun was quiet for a moment. "Of course you did. I can access the security cameras, the elevator controls, and the fire suppression system. I can't do anything about the stairwells." "I'll handle the stairwells." They parked 2 streets away. in a narrow gap between delivery trucks that were staged for the morning's early runs. The walk to her building took 4 minutes. She knew every step of it. She had walked this route hundreds of times. The specific sound of this pavement, the way the streetlight on the corner flickered on cold nights, the smell of the bakery on the ground floor of the building next to hers that started its ovens at 4 a.m. and let the scent of it spill out into the street. She had never paid attention to any of it as anything other than the texture of her daily life. She paid attention to all of it now, filed it differently, understood that the route from the parked car to her front door was a series of exposure points and cover positions, and that she was moving through it as exactly that, and that she was doing so without having been taught. Jae-hyun stopped her at the corner of her building with a hand on her arm. They pressed flat against the exterior wall, the cold concrete rough through her blazer. He looked up at her building's face, counting floors, reading windows, doing whatever calculation men trained to do this did. 7, he said quietly. Your unit faces south? South and west, corner apartment. 2 windows showing ambient light, one on the 6th floor, that's below yours, one on the 8th, above. He looked at her. Your floor is dark. They wouldn't advertise. No. He looked into the building entrance. Glass doors, key fob access, a small lobby with a security desk that was unmanned between midnight and 6 a.m. A detail she knew because she had been the person who filed the building management staffing schedule once as part of a lease renewal document. I'm going in through the service entrance on the north side. It connects to both stairwells. He looked at her. I need you here, on the building systems, cameras and elevator. Can you run that from your phone? From the secondary drive connected to my phone, yes, if the building's Wi-Fi is accessible from street level. Get on it. He held her gaze. 2 seconds. The specific length she had learned to read as him saying something he wasn't saying in words. When I give you a signal, what signal? I'll call your phone. 1 ring. When you get it, shut the elevators down and lock the stairwell doors, every floor simultaneously. The stairwell doors are fire doors. If I engage the fire containment protocol, they lock automatically and the suppression system arms. Yes. The people inside the stairwells won't be able to get out until the system resets. Yes. She looked at him. That takes 12 minutes to reset. I know. You'll be inside. Yes. She held the transmitter he'd given her. Pingcha Insu now, before you go in. He took the transmitter from her hand and pressed the single button. A small light pulsed once, red, then went dark. 6 minutes, he said. 6 minutes. He looked at her one more time. The thing in his face that she had been accumulating in the folder she refused to name, all of it, compressed into the specific look of a man who had something to say and the absolute wrong moment to say it. He went around the corner toward the north side of the building. She pulled out her phone, connected the secondary drive, navigated to the building management portal with the administrative credentials she had memorized on a day she had never anticipated would matter. The system opened. She pulled up the camera feeds. 7th floor corridor, dark, no visible movement. But the camera at the corridor's midpoint was showing a frame that was slightly too still. Not the natural stillness of an empty corridor, the specific stillness of a frozen frame. A looped image fed into the system to replace a live feed. They'd cut her floor's cameras, which meant they didn't know about the camera on the 6th floor stairwell landing, which she was looking at now, which was not cut, which showed 2 men in the stairwell outside the door to 7. Standing, weapons, the patient stance of people who were waiting for something specific. She texted Jae-hyun. 2 in the south stairwell, 7th floor landing, armed. A pause. Then, north? She checked the north stairwell camera. 1 person, 6th floor landing, looking up. 1 on 6, north, she texted. Looking up toward 7. Another pause, longer. Then her phone lit up. 1 ring. She engaged the fire containment protocol. The effect was immediate and visible on the camera feeds. Every fire door in the building swinging closed and locking simultaneously. The system's confirmation lights going from green to red across the schematic. The suppression system arming with a status indicator she watched populate in real time. The 2 men on the 7th floor south landing were suddenly trapped between 2 locked fire doors. She watched them on camera realize it. the way their postures changed, the specific physical language of men understanding that their exit had just disappeared. She watched the north stairwell camera. The single figure on 6 was reacting, pushing against the door to 7, which was now locked, turning to go back down, finding the door to 6 also locked, trapped. Then something moved on the camera she'd almost missed. The elevator feed, showing the car on 9, beginning to descend. Someone had called it. She locked the elevator immediately, froze it between 8 and 9. Shouts, audible even through the building's walls and the phone she held up toward the exterior. Then a sound from above and to her left. 7th floor, south face. A window opening. She looked up. A figure was on the fire escape, moving down, fast. Not one of the trapped figures. The fire escape was on the building's north face. This was the south side, which meant this was someone who hadn't been in the stairwell. Someone who had been in her apartment. Someone who had anticipated a stairwell lock. The figure reached the 6th floor landing of the fire escape and stopped. Looked down at the street. Looked directly at Nyla. Even at this distance, in the pre-dawn dark, she knew the face. Seo Min-ah. 40 years old, dark coat, hair pulled back. Dae-hyun's widow. The woman Nyla had processed condolence correspondence for. Had organized 3 years of anniversary observance calendar entries for. Had watched at organizational events with the specific invisible attention she brought to every person in Jae-hyun's orbit. The woman who had spent 3 years inside the most trusted position available to her and had used every moment of that access to engineer the death of the man who had trusted her most. They looked at each other. Min-ah started moving again. Down. She was going to hit the ground in 40 seconds, and she had a head start in a direction Nyla didn't know. And everything on the home server, and Nyla was standing in the street with no weapon and a phone and a transmitter she'd already used. 40 seconds. She looked at the fire escape, looked at the gap between the building's exterior and the lowest ladder position, which extended to within 8 feet of the ground on a drop mechanism that responded to weight. She was not going to chase Seo Min-ah up a fire escape. She was not built for that, and she knew it without shame or hesitation. She knew what she could and couldn't do. And physical pursuit was not in her inventory. But she knew something else. She pulled up the building management portal and navigated to the exterior maintenance systems. The fire escape ladder drop mechanism was listed under building safety equipment. It had a maintenance lockout function designed to prevent the ladder from deploying during scheduled exterior work. She engaged the lockout. The ladder froze in the retracted position, 8 feet off the ground. Min-ah reached the bottom platform, put her foot on the first rung of the ladder, found it immovable. She looked down at the 8-foot drop to concrete. She looked at Nyla. Nyla looked back at her. Min-ah jumped. She landed hard, rolled, came up limping. Right ankle. The landing angle had been bad. She straightened and looked at Nyla, and in the pre-dawn streetlight, her face had a quality Nyla had not expected and was not prepared for. Not cold, not calculating, not the face of someone who had spent 3 years constructing a betrayal. It was a face that was wrecked. Grief and fury and something else. Something that looked from the outside like a woman who had done something she believed in and had been watching it cost her everything in real time. "You don't understand," Min-ah said. Her English was accented, precise. "What they did to him. What Jae-hyun's people did to Dae-hyun." "Woo-jin killed your husband," Nyla said. "Not Jae-hyun." Min-ah's face did something. A fracture. Small, visible. The kind of micro-expression that only appeared when something struck bone rather than armor. "You don't know. DH Consulting Services. The wire transfer 4 days ago. The vendor authorization from 22 months ago." Nyla kept her voice steady, flat. "Woo-jin, not Jae-hyun. Your husband found out about Woo-jin, and Woo-jin killed him, and then Woo-jin let you believe it was Jae-hyun because a grieving widow with executive access and a reason for revenge was the most useful asset he could have imagined." Min-ah was completely still. "He used you," Nyla said, "and you let him because you needed someone to blame, and he handed you Jae-hyun, and you took it." The silence between them had the quality of something that had just irrevocably changed shape. Min-ah took one step toward her. The ankle was bad, the movement wrong. Her face was doing the wrecked thing, fully now, no armor left on it. "If that's true, it's true. Then everything She stopped. Something moved through her face that was not expressible in ordinary vocabulary. 3 years of architecture collapsing. Everything I did. Yes. Mina looked at her. Really looked at her. The way nobody in this organization looked at Nyla, not as background or infrastructure, but as a specific person, a source of something real. "Who are you?" she said. Before Nyla could answer, the building's front doors burst open and 2 of Wu Jin's men came through. Not from the stairwells, from the lobby, a third entry point she hadn't covered because she hadn't known to cover it. And the situation reorganized itself in 1 second, from a conversation into something else entirely. Mina moved, wrong direction, away from the men, toward the street, the damaged ankle giving under her. And one of the men reached for her. And Nyla did the only thing she had available to her, which was step directly into his path, which was not a plan, which was the opposite of a plan, which was her body declining again to continue in the direction of its own safety. And she was starting to recognize this as a pattern. The man's arm caught her across the chest. She went down. The concrete came up fast, and her left palm and her right knee took it, and it hurt in the immediate specific way of damage that the adrenaline was only partially buffering, her glasses skidding across the pavement, the phone skittering from her hand. She heard Mina make a sound. She looked up from the pavement. Wu Jin was standing at the building entrance. Not a feed, not a camera. Present. In person. In a coat she recognized because she had looked at the man wearing it in a corridor 4 hours ago and made the worst-case calculation she'd hoped was wrong. He looked down at her on the pavement with the expression of a man completing a task. "Where's the drive?" he said. She looked up at him from the concrete with her palm bleeding and her knee on fire and the secondary drive pressing against her skin and said nothing. "Neela." He said her name the way you said the name of a problem you'd been watching from a distance and were finally, at the end of a long night, close enough to resolve. "You're the only person in this organization who was ever actually more useful than you appeared." He crouched to her eyeline, which put his face 18 inches from hers, and put his presence in the specific category of things she filed under genuinely dangerous rather than theoretically dangerous. "Give me the drive and this is over." She looked at his face. The 11-year face. The face of a man who had run the machinery of Kang Jae-hyun's organization for over a decade, with a parallel objective operating the whole time. She thought about Dae-hyun, about a man who had found exactly what she had found and had not survived the finding. "You killed him," she said. Her voice came out steadier than she expected. Dae-hyun. Woo Jin's face did something small. An acknowledgement that wasn't quite admission because it didn't need to be. They were past the point of needing to be careful about words. He found something he shouldn't have. "Same thing I did." "Yes." He held her gaze. "But you're smarter than he was, which is why you're going to give me the drive." Behind him, his man had Mina by the arm. Mina was not fighting. She was looking at Woo Jin with an expression that had gone very, very still in a specific way. The stillness of someone who had just had a fundamental architecture collapse and was standing in the rubble with everything newly visible. Nyla's hand was on the pavement, palm bleeding. She could feel each heartbeat in the wound. She looked at Woo Jin. Thought about 6 minutes. Thought about when the ping had gone out. Thought about the time elapsed. Thought about the fact that she had no way of knowing if 6 minutes had passed or 4 or 7, that her phone was 6 feet away on the pavement, that every calculation she had was running on an internal clock that the last several hours had made profoundly unreliable. "Okay," she said. Woo Jin's expression shifted, a fraction of relaxation. The specific micro-expression of a man who had been prepared for resistance and was recalculating for compliance. She reached toward her jacket. The street behind Woo Jin lit up. Not one vehicle. 4. No headlights until that moment, running dark the way Jae-hyun's car had run, appearing from 2 directions simultaneously and stopping in positions that closed off both ends of the street with a precision that was not accidental. Doors opening, figures moving, the organized, kinetic quality of people who had been briefed on a specific situation and were executing against it without improvisation. Woo Jin stood up from his crouch. He turned, and from the building's north side, from the service entrance, Kang Jae-hyun walked into the street with 2 weapons and the expression of a man who had been carrying something for 8 months and had just arrived at the place where he got to put it down. Woo Jin looked at him. Jae-hyun looked at Woo Jin. 11 years between them in the 3 seconds of silence that followed. Everything that had been real in it, and everything that had been constructed, and the specific grief of not being able to separate one from the other. Boss, Woo Jin din geht's boss, Woo Jin said. Old reflex. The word came out the way it always had. Steady, immediate. A decade of repetition, making it automatic even now. Even here. Jae-hyun's face did the blank thing. Then it did something else. Don't, he said. His voice was, don't, Jae-hyun said. His voice was not loud. It didn't need to be. It carried the specific weight of a man who had arrived at the end of something and knew exactly where he was standing. Woo Jin looked at him across the pre-dawn street with 11 years of shared history between them and a weapon in his hand that he hadn't raised yet, which was the most dangerous kind. The kind being held by a man who was still calculating. How much did you know? Woo Jin asked. His voice had lost the operational quality. It was quieter now, almost conversational. The kind of quiet that came after a long effort was over, and what remained was just the truth, stripped of its engineering. Before tonight. 8 months. Something moved across Woo Jin's face. An intake of breath held too long. And you waited. I needed to be certain about all 3 of you. You could have... Woo Jin stopped, recalculated. There was no version of this where you walked away from it. No, Jae-hyun said. There wasn't. Nyla was still on this pavement. Her palm had stopped bleeding the way wounds did when the adrenaline was running high enough. Or it was still bleeding and she couldn't feel it, which was its own kind of information. She pressed her hand flat against the concrete and pushed herself to sitting and looked at the 2 men across the space between them and understood that what was happening right now was not about strategy or positioning or the drive she was carrying. It was about something older and more specific than that. It was about a dead man and the brother he left behind, and 11 years of proximity that had been, on one side, entirely real. Cha In-soo's people had closed the perimeter. She could see them in her peripheral vision. 8, maybe 10 figures, positioned with the practiced spacing of men who had done this before. Not aggressive yet. Containing. Woo Jin's man still had Min-ah by the arm. Min-ah was looking at Woo Jin. He told me it was Jae-hyun, Min-ah said. Her voice came out stripped of everything. No accusation, no performance, nothing but the flat sound of a woman speaking the architecture of her own catastrophe aloud for the first time. He came to me 3 months after Dae-hyun died. He told me Jae-hyun had ordered it. That Dae-hyun had been moving against Jae-hyun's authority, that Jae-hyun had decided... She stopped, pressed her lips together. He told me he couldn't prove it, that the only way to get justice for Dae-hyun was from inside, that I was the only person positioned to do it. No one spoke. I believed him, she said. For 3 years I believed him. Woo Jin did not look at her. He kept his eyes on Jae-hyun, but something in his posture changed. A minute shift, almost invisible, the adjustment of a man who was feeling the specific weight of a thing he had constructed pressing back against him from an angle he hadn't fully modeled. Min-ah, Jae-hyun said, not looking away from Woo Jin. Step away from him. The man holding Min-ah's arm tightened his grip. Nyla moved, not toward the man, toward her phone, which was 6 feet away on the pavement where it had skidded. She got there on her hands and knees, which was not dignified and which she did not care about, and picked it up and pulled up the building management system and engaged the exterior floodlights. The street went from pre-dawn dark to blinding white in 1 second. Everyone reacted. The man holding Min-ah brought his free hand up to shield his eyes. Min-ah dropped her weight, pulled her arm through the compromised grip, and went down and sideways in the specific practiced motion of someone who had, at some point in her life before grief made her someone's instrument, known how to move when a hold went loose. She hit the ground. She rolled. She came up on her damaged ankle, swore quietly in Korean, and put the parked car between herself and the man who'd been holding her. Jae-hyun was already moving. What followed lasted less than 90 seconds, and Nyla watched it from the pavement with the floodlights burning above, and her brain doing what it did, cataloging, filing, processing, because it was the only thing available to her in a situation where her body had reached the limit of what she could physically contribute. Cha In-soo's people moved on the 2 remaining operational threats. They were professional and precise, and it was over with a completeness that left no ambiguity. Woo Jin was the last. He and Jae Hyun were standing 6 feet apart when the perimeter closed around them. Woo Jin's weapon was up, finally up, the calculation having resolved in the direction she'd feared. And Jae Hyun's was up, and for 3 seconds the street held the specific terrible stillness of two men who had spent 11 years in proximity to each other and were now at the absolute end of what that proximity had been. "He was my brother too," Woo Jin said. His voice had gone somewhere she hadn't heard it before, beneath the operational register, beneath the 11-year construction. Not by blood, but in every way that... He stopped. His jaw worked. "You know what he was to me." "I know," Jae Hyun said. His voice was the controlled thing, the forged thing. But she could hear from where she sat on the pavement what it was costing him. "That's what I can't forgive." He was going to destroy everything. The evidence he was compiling, it wasn't just about me. It would have brought the entire organization down. Every alliance, He was my brother. He was going to get you killed. He was my brother. Jae-hyun's voice didn't rise. It went the opposite direction, down into something bedrock level and final. "Nothing else you say matters." Woo Jin looked at him. The weapon was still up. His hand was steady. 11 years of this had given him the ability to be steady in moments that would unmake other men. But his face, in the floodlights, was not steady. His face was the face of a man standing in the ruin of the only version of himself he'd believed in. "I built this organization," he said, "alongside you for 11 years. Everything that works, works because of..." "I know," Jae-hyun said. "I know exactly what you built. I know exactly what you were." The distinction between was and are landed in the space between them. Woo Jin's weapon lowered, not dropped, lowered. The motion of someone making a choice that wasn't surrender exactly, but was the adjacent thing. The recognition that the fight was over, not because of force, but because of something that had run out. Cha In-soo's people moved. It ended. Nyla sat on the pavement and looked at the sky above the street, which was beginning at the building's roofline, to show the first gray suggestion of a morning that had no idea what it was arriving into. Her left palm was throbbing. Her right knee had stiffened. She was cold in a way that had finally gotten through everything, and she was so tired that the tiredness had moved past sensation into something more fundamental, a tiredness at the cellular level, the kind that sleep addressed but didn't cure. She heard footsteps, stopped in front of her. She looked up. Tae-hyun crouched to her level, not standing over her, crouching, which put his face at her height, which was the thing she noticed because it was the kind of detail that went into the folder she had been refusing to name, and which she was now too tired to refuse anything. He looked at her hand. "Let me see." "It's fine." "Let me see it." She held out her palm. He turned it over in his, looked at the road rash with the same focused attention he brought to everything that mattered. His hands were not gentle exactly. He wasn't a gentle man, that wasn't the right word for it, but they were careful, deliberate. There was a quality of intention in the way he handled her hand that was different from utility. "You put on the floodlights," he said. It was the fastest option. It was the right option. He looked up from her hand. His eyes in the early gray light were doing the things she had been cataloging since the safe room, except that now, with everything stripped away by the accumulated hours of the night, it was fully legible. Not a recalibration, not an assessment. Something she had spent 4 years learning to not read into things, which meant she was practiced at missing it, and she was too tired to keep practicing. "Can you stand?" he asked. "Yes." She stood, with his hand under her elbow, and the world stayed in one place. "Min-ah." He looked toward the car where Seo Min-ah was still sitting on the ground, her back against the tire, her damaged ankle extended. "She'll be dealt with." "She was used," Nyla said. "Woo Jin recruited her grief. She didn't..." "I know." His voice was not warm on the subject, not cold either. It was the voice of a man who understood something complicated and was not yet ready to feel the complexity. "She still made choices." "Yes," Nyla said. "She did." She looked at Min-ah, at the woman who had spent 3 years directing her husband's grief into the wrong target, who had opened security blind spots and sold operational intelligence and helped engineer a night that had left bodies on the 42nd floor of a skyscraper, who had done all of it believing she was getting justice and had found out, on a pre-dawn street in Mapugu, that she had been the instrument of the man she was trying to destroy. There was no clean category for that. Nyla didn't try to put it in one. Her cooperation matters, Neela said. What she knows about the Jongseon Group's structure, their operational contacts, the access points she created. She has information that's worth more than whatever sentence is waiting for her. Jae-hyun looked at her. I'm not saying let her go, Neela said. I'm saying use what she has before you decide what she is. He looked at her for a long moment. The analytical quality and the other thing, layered together in the way they'd been layering all night. You were a secretary, he said. 4 years ago. I was never just a secretary. No, he said. You weren't. They stood on her street in the early morning while Cha In-soo's people completed the containment and the floodlights hummed above them, and Seoul began its first tentative movements toward the day. A delivery truck turned onto the block, saw the situation, reversed. Somewhere above them, a light came on in a window. Mrs. O on the 4th floor, whose cat feeding she had relied on, and whose building management login she had borrowed, and who would call Nyla's cell in 3 hours to ask if everything was all right because she was 72 years old and had an instinct for disturbance that no security system could match. Nyla thought, I'm going to need to have a conversation with Mrs. O. She thought, I'm going to need to have a lot of conversations. She thought about the archive, the compromised home server, everything Woo Jin's people had accessed in her apartment, evidence she had spent 2 years compiling, pulled out from under her in a single night. She thought about what remained, the 2 drives, and Dae-hyun's file, and the testimony of 3 surviving attackers who had operational knowledge of the Jongseon Group's network, and Min Ah, who knew more than she'd been meant to about the full infrastructure of what had been built around her. It wasn't nothing. It was in fact enough. She understood that she had been doing the math on this since the secondary location, without consciously doing the math, and the math said that what remained was sufficient to dismantle the Jongseon Group's operational capacity and seal every breach that the 3-year infiltration had opened. It was not a clean outcome. There was no clean outcome from a night like this. But it was a real one, which was what was available, and she had always worked with what was available. She said, I need to get into your secondary location network again. The DH consulting thread connects to 3 more entities that I didn't finish tracing. Before Woo Jin's people get access to legal representation and start managing what comes out, I need to close those threads. Jae-hyun looked at her. I can have it done in 4 hours, she said. Maybe 3. Nyla. The Jongseon Group has a financial clearing operation that runs through Nyla. His voice had something in it, not the operational quality. The other thing. She stopped. You've been awake for, he calculated, 22 hours at minimum. You're bleeding on my street. Your knee is wrong. You have done. He stopped. Started again with the precision of a man who found words for things inexactly but chose them carefully. You have done more tonight than everyone else in this organization combined, and you are standing here telling me you want to work. She looked at him. There's a time-sensitive, the threads will still be there in 8 hours. The legal window. I have attorneys who can handle the legal window. He looked at her, the directness of it. What I don't have is another Nyla. The sentence landed in the cold morning air and sat there. She looked at him, at the exhaustion under his control, the sutures in his side, the split lip, the split in the controlled surface that had been widening since the safe room and was now, in the flat pre-dawn honesty of a street in Mapugu, fully open. He looked, for the first time in 4 years, like a man she was actually seeing rather than observing. The drive, she said. She reached into her jacket and produced the secondary, held it out to him. Give this to Cha In-soo. He can start the financial analysis with his people while you sleep, while I reconstruct the DH consulting Nyla. She looked at his face. Sleep, he said. The rest exists tomorrow. She wanted to argue, held the want up and looked at it and recognized that underneath the urgent architecture of continuing to work, continuing to be useful, continuing to justify her presence in the operational machinery, there was something simpler and more uncomfortable. which was that stopping meant feeling everything she'd put in the box during the last 7 hours, and the box was very full. She gave him the drive. They went inside. Her apartment had been professionally searched, which meant it was disrupted in specific targeted ways rather than ransacked. Drawers pulled, closet contents shifted, the home server physically removed from its shelf, and the cable left coiled on the floor like a shed skin. Her cat, Comma, a gray tabby she had named for the way she slept, curled into a punctuation mark, was sitting on top of the refrigerator with the particular affronted dignity of an animal whose environment had been interfered with and who wished to register her displeasure formally. Nyla stood in her living room and looked at the space where the server had been. 2 years of work, removed in under an hour. She thought about what she still had, what she'd always had, which was the thing that had produced the archive in the first place, the mind that had built it, the pattern recognition, the attention, the ability to see what was there rather than what was convenient to see. They hadn't taken that. They couldn't. Kama jumped down from the refrigerator, walked across the kitchen, and pressed her head against Nyla's calf with the insistence of an animal who had been fed by someone else tonight and found the substitute inadequate. Nyla crouched down, which hurt, and put her uninjured hand on the cat's back and held still for a moment. Jae-hyun was standing in the doorway of her apartment. She had not invited him in. He had followed her up through the building with a quality of presence that was different from the operational accompaniment of the last several hours. Quieter, less purposeful, the presence of someone who wasn't ready to be in a room alone yet and wasn't going to say so. She looked up at him. "She needs feeding." "Yes," he said. He looked around her apartment, took it in, the full space of it, small and organized and specifically hers, every object in a place that reflected a decision she'd made alone, over 3 years of living inside a life she'd built entirely from her own resources. She watched him take it in with the receptive quality that his face adopted when it was receiving something it hadn't processed before, and she thought, he has never been in a space like this. A space that was genuinely someone else's. She fed the cat. Then she sat at her kitchen table and put her head down on her arms for what she told herself was 30 seconds and woke up 47 minutes later to the sound of Jae-hyun speaking quietly in Korean on his phone at her window. The light in the room had changed. The city was fully morning now, gray and ordinary and moving. She could hear traffic, a delivery horn somewhere on the street below. She lifted her head. He was off the phone. Standing at her window with his back to the room, he had his jacket off, the bandaged side visible through his shirt. The posture of a man who had been standing in one place long enough to let his guard down below the threshold he usually maintained, which for him was still higher than most people's full alert. "Cha In-soo has the drives," he said, without turning. "His analysts are running the DH consulting thread. The Jeongseon Group's financial clearing operation will be shut down by noon." A pause. "Woojin's in custody. Park Yeon-soo was picked up 40 minutes ago at the airport. He didn't make his flight." Another pause. "Minna has agreed to cooperate. Full disclosure. She asked..." He stopped. "She asked whether it was true. What you told her about Woojin and Dae-hyun. What did you tell her?" "I told her yes." His voice was even, the even of something that required effort to maintain. "I showed her the documentation from Dae-hyun's file." Silence. "How did she take it?" Nyla asked. "The way you take it when you've been aiming at the wrong target for 3 years." He turned from the window, looked at her. "She asked about you." "About me?" "She asked who you were." "I told her you were my secretary." Something moved in his face. Then I corrected myself. Nyla looked at him across her small kitchen. In the ordinary morning light, without the emergency amber or the security feed gray or the flood white of the street, he looked like a person. That was the only way she could put it. The controlled surface was present, but it was resting rather than working. And underneath it was a man who was 53 hours into something that had cost him the shape of the world as he'd understood it, and who was standing in a stranger's kitchen because he wasn't ready to go back to the version of his life that existed outside of it. "What did you correct yourself to?" she asked. He was quiet for a moment. The quality of quiet that meant he was choosing words with the care he usually brought only to things that mattered operationally. "Someone who has been keeping this organization alive," he said, from a desk nobody looked at. She held that. That's not small, he said. I want you to know I understand that. What you did. What you've been doing. For 2 years, for 4 years. In ways I should have... He stopped. I should have seen it. You were looking at other things. That's not an excuse. No, she said. But it's human. She looked at him steadily. We keep saying that to each other tonight. Something in his face settled. A degree of tension she hadn't even registered until it released. Yes, it doesn't get easier, she said. What happened tonight? Wu Jin, Mina, your brother. None of it. The understanding of it doesn't come in a week or a month. She met his eyes. I'm not telling you that because I've experienced anything comparable. I'm telling you because I've spent 4 years watching this organization carry things it doesn't know how to put down. And what I've seen is that it goes better when people stop pretending the weight isn't there. He looked at her for a long time. Is that what you've been doing? Watching? Yes. And what did you see? She thought about answering in the indirect way she answered most things. The efficient delivery, the organized structure. Thought about the folder she'd been refusing to name. Thought about the specific texture of 4 years of careful, private attention directed at a man who hadn't known he was being watched, and who had not, in the moment of crisis, been the man she was afraid he might be. Someone worth watching, she said. He held her gaze. The expression on his face was not the controlled thing and was not the blank thing. It was something she didn't have a prior category for because she'd never seen it there before. Something that was, underneath all the architecture, simply open. He crossed the kitchen. He sat down at her table, across from her, not beside her, because he was a man who understood space, and he was not going to compress hers, and put his hands flat on the surface and looked at them, and then at her. I would like, he said, with the careful diction of someone making an argument he's only worked out the first principles of, to start again. She looked at him. Start what again? Whatever this is. He met her eyes. Without the parts where I didn't see you. That was most of the 4 years. Yes. He didn't flinch. I know. She looked at his hands on her kitchen table, at the scar on his jaw, at the man underneath the construction, which she had been documenting from a distance for 4 years and was now close enough to simply see directly. She thought about the safe room and the almost laugh, and the hand finding her arm in the dark. She thought about him crouching on her pavement to look at her hand. She thought about the fact that she had come back in his office when her body had declined to continue in the direction of her own safety. She had never examined why. She was done not examining it. I have conditions, she said. Something in his face shifted. The shape of the almost smile, fully visible this time. Tell me. My desk stays where it is. My work stays what it is, but all of it, not the official version. Yes, I operate with full access to any system relevant to what I'm tracking, not contingent on whether someone remembers to update my clearance level. Yes, and when I flag something in any format through any channel, I don't want a memo that disappears into a binder. He held her gaze. The gravity of it was not lost on him. She could see that. The full weight of what had been wasted by the system of convenient invisibility she had been allowed to exist in. What it had cost. What it had nearly cost. You have my word, he said. That ends today. She nodded. Kama jumped onto the table between them, regarded Jae-hyun with the sovereign suspicion of an animal assessing an intrusion, and then sat down directly on his hands. He looked at the cat. He looked at Nyla. She does that, Nyla said. I see. It means she's decided you can stay. He looked down at the cat again. Something moved in his face that was entirely unguarded and entirely unfamiliar, and was, she thought, the most complete thing she had seen on him in 4 years of watching. He reached out with one hand, carefully, the way you approached something you didn't have experience with but were willing to try, and scratched behind the cat's ear. Kama began to purr. The morning continued around them. The city outside Nyla's window was fully operational now, indifferent and enormous, moving through a day that had no knowledge of what the night before it had contained. Somewhere across Seoul, Cha In-su's analysts were running the DH consulting thread toward its end. The Jongseon Group's financial clearing operation had less than 6 hours before it was structurally dismantled. The people who had spent 3 years building an architecture of betrayal inside the Black Phoenix Syndicate were in custody or in process of being so, and the damage they had done was real and would take time and would leave marks that didn't fully heal. None of that was resolved. It was only over. Nyla sat at her kitchen table and looked at the man across from her, the cat between them, the morning light laying itself out across the ordinary surface of things, and understood something that wasn't the kind of thing she put in files or cross-referenced against other data or memorized for operational utility. It was the kind of thing you understood in the body before the mind had language for it, that the 4 years had not been wasted, that the invisibility had been, all along, a form of paying attention, that she had been watching and building and holding steady inside a life that was smaller than what she was capable of, waiting without knowing she was waiting for the moment when the full size of her would be required. The moment had come. She was still here. She reached across the table and took her own hands off the surface and felt the throb in her left palm and the tightness in her knee and the deep specific exhaustion of a person who had been, for 7 hours, more fully herself than she had ever managed to be while being invisible. "I should sleep," she said. "Yes," he said. Neither of them moved for another minute. Outside, Soul moved through the ordinary business of the morning. The sky lightened by degrees, the specific gray of a city day settling in over the river and the glass towers and the unremarkable street where a woman who had spent 4 years being overlooked sat at her kitchen table and let herself be seen, finally, by the one person whose attention she had spent 4 years pretending not to want. The cat purred between them. The drives were with Cha and Sue. The threads were being closed. The name Nyla Brooks had been, until last night, a name that moved through the Black Phoenix Syndicate like furniture moved through a room. Present, functional, unremarked upon. The kind of name you said without thinking. The kind of person the organization ran on without acknowledging. That ended today. Not with a ceremony or a title or a declaration across a room full of people waiting to be told what to think. It ended here. In a small kitchen on the 7th floor of an ordinary building in Mapugu, with a cat on a man's hands and the morning coming in through the window and 2 people sitting across from each other in the uncomplicated honesty of what remained after everything else had burned away. She had never been invisible. The world had simply never been forced to look before. Now it had looked, and it would not forget what it had seen.